record in the clouds. Okay, I'm not supposed to do that, but I can't get it off this computer easily. Okay, here we go. So started the recording. This is anatomy. Here we go. There we go. So you may have heard the term gross anatomy. I think this term is funny because it makes you think, ew, but that's actually not what it's talking about. Gross in this case is looking at large structures. Has anybody taken French? Think about this because the word gross here, I'm pretty sure it comes from the word gros, G-R-O-S, which means like kind of big in French. And so basically we're talking about big anatomy. That's all gross anatomy means here. And so it's large structures, it's easily observable, and this shows you that if you learn other languages, it will make other things in English will make sense to you. And I like to point that out because in science, especially if you know Romance languages, it helps understand some of the terminology because so much of our science terminology is based in Latin. A lot of these, by the way, I should make the point in case you don't know, Romance languages are Latin-based languages, which you probably already know, but I'll make sure that you hear that from me. So if when you know Spanish or Italian, French, and there's a number of other ones, Portuguese, and some minor ones, they have some basis in Latin terminology, and if you know them, it can help you. The good thing is that English also has a lot of Romance influence, especially with French and Latin at different points in our history. So when you see terms that you don't know, try to tease them apart. We'll talk about some of that teasing apart of language terms as we come across. But this is the first one here maybe that we talk about with gross. It's not ew, not something disgusting, but actually talking about large because it comes from not English. One great thing about English, we just absorb everything else, and our vocabulary lists are way larger than most other languages. So let's look at an example of gross anatomy, and we'll use the digestive organs to give this example. So in this case, gross anatomy are definitely going to be things that you can see with the naked eye. And of course, the first anatomists would have been looking at things with the naked eye. They would have been studying the body before we had microscopy. We will bring in microscopy, looking at tissues on a microscopic level as we go on, but we're going to look at this as someone from the 1600s, the 1500s, okay, the grave robber days, and totally that's so true. They would, you know that, right? That they would steal bodies from graves so they could study them. There is some basis in Frankenstein, not necessarily trying to, of course, reanimate. Well, they did try to reanimate, but it didn't work, not the same way. I'm sorry, I have random information. It's about how I work. Okay. I haven't really taught in person in a while. And I feel like I'm all over the place. So with the digestive system here, we have the oral cavity, lots of cavities in the body. And of course, when we think the word cavity, you probably think about teeth, right? So what do you think cavity really is if it's not just a thing for your teeth? A space. And it doesn't actually even have to hold something. It can just be the space itself. Sometimes we talk about cavities in the earth, cavern, cave, all of those are related terminologies. We get cavities in our teeth because basically it's a hole. It's not supposed to be there, but it's a hole. We have cavities that are supposed to be there. Okay, in this case, the oral cavity, which is just our mouth, which leads to the esophagus, which leads to the stomach, and of course, there's a lot more going on along the way, into the small intestine, into the large intestine, out the rectum, and there we go. So these are things that would have been seen easily with the naked eye if you dissected a body. By the way, dissection is for dead things. Vivisection, if you've ever heard that, is if you open up something that's still living. So there actually is a terminology for both of those things. Vivisection. Viva, two B's. Like viva, to live, or not to live, but um, so it's meaning that it's still alive while it's being dissected. And that does happen um, for certain reasons. If you need to see how things are working, basically surgery is to some degree a kind of vivisection, not to see how it works, but to fix things. But no, there is actually two different terminologies for that. And I said there is microscopic anatomy, structures that are too small to be seen with the naked eye and would not have been known when anatomy was first developing as a study. And so this is cells and tissues that can only be seen with the microscope. Can anybody tell me what, and even those of you on Zoom, if you want to pipe up, that's totally fine. What's the connection between cells and tissues? Any ideas? What's that? Cells make up tissues, exactly. Cells are the basic unit of life, and tissues are types of cells that work together for a certain function. We have heart tissue, and those heart cells do certain things that are different than brain cells. It doesn't mean they don't contain the same DNA, but they developed to be different things. So we will study some things based on at the tissue level, not just at the gross anatomy really becomes organs and organ systems. Tissues make up those organs, cells make up those tissues. And you see that there's kind of an organization of how things build on top of each other. So cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and then organism, which is the individual, the person, or the dog, or the horse, or whatever the case may be. Am I moving too fast? You good? Okay. What's wrong with? So let's look at some microscopic anatomy using the digestive system. If we're in the stomach, you can actually see the gross anatomy of the stomach, but when you look more closely, there are cells that you can see that make up the tissue, the lining of the stomach. So you can see gastric pits that you wouldn't have seen with the naked eye. These are specific cells. You can see that there's actually the nucleus inside the cells. And these are part of glands that are inside the stomach lining. Okay, so a lot of things are produced by those cells and secreted, or they prevent things from crossing them, so they act as a barrier. They give structure or shape depending on how you organize those cells into tissues. So we'll see various different uses for those tissues and cells, and how they're organized will make a big difference. Here we can see some of these parietal cells. We can see that they're connected, so pepsinogen and pepsin. These are going to be involved in the digestive process. Okay, and when these come together with HCl, which is your stomach acid, you get changes in certain chemical reactions that take place. And of course, in the stomach, we know it's all about breakdown of food, right? Now, the stomach is not the only place where food is broken down, but specifically proteins. That type of food is broken down in the stomach, and that's what pepsins are for. Okay, pepsins are enzymes that will be breaking down your food, your proteins, I should say. So can you give me an example of a type of protein, like a food protein? What would be a food that would be considered a protein, majority protein? Meat, okay. Also eggs. There are proteins in other things. You have a large amount of protein even in things like oats, but there are other things besides that as well. You never get just a single type of macromolecule. You may get mixtures. Like in meat, you also have lipids because there's fats and oils that are involved too. But those are broken down in different places. So when we get to the digestive system, we'll cover that in more detail. Okay, physiology is different than anatomy. We lump them together in the class because not only do we want to know what we are put together with, but how do they work? How do those things function together in groups? And so physiology is just the study of the body and its parts and how they work together or function together. Excuse me. So that's why it's anatomy and physiology. Physiology would have come later because if you don't understand what the parts are, you can't figure out how they get used by the body. So structures determine what functions can occur. You're obviously not going to have blood pumping from your stomach because you don't. That's not what it does. The heart doesn't work that way. And in your lungs, you've got air sacs, and there's very thin walls allowing for gas exchange between the capillaries of the blood, the vascular system, and the lungs. And of course, not all versions of your blood vessels and veins are able to absorb. It's only the capillaries, not at the vessels. It's not at the different forms because you get different thicknesses, and the thicker something is, the harder it is to cross. So capillaries are very thin, and that's what you find at the lungs and other places throughout the body. So when we go through the vascular system, you'll see that some parts of the cardiovascular system have really thick-walled vessels, and that's because they're under high pressure. And it's to make sure they don't blow up or explode when the heart pumps through them. But as you get further away from the heart, you can get thinner because you have less pressure as you get further away from the heart. And of course, there has to be a place where you have that exchange of whatever's in the blood with what's outside the blood. So some things go in, some things come out, and you have to have thin walls to do that. So that's kind of an example of what physiology is. Okay, so here's our levels of organization. I've kind of already talked about this, except I left out atoms. Okay, so cells are the first step of living organisms. So the smallest living unit of life is a cell, but you have to make those cells up with various molecules, and molecules, whether they're macromolecules or just small molecules, are all made of atoms. We put them together, we get cells. Put those together, you get tissues. Different tissues make different organs. Organs work together in systems. It's the organ systems level that we're probably looking at physiology the most, probably for this class at least, and then at the organism level as well. How all of those organs work together to make the organism. So atoms make molecules. Molecules are put together to make cells. Cells make, when you have lots of those cells, especially cells that do the same kind of function, they become tissues. When those tissues, multiple different kinds of tissues function together, you get organs. And when you get organs of different kinds of things doing different, maybe different parts of different jobs, you get the organ system, and then you get the organism as all of those different organ systems work together. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Before we get to that organ system review, I do want to mention one thing about cells. I can't remember if we're going to get to this later, but make a list in your notes here about what cells need. I think this would be important to know as we get through things. There are 4 macromolecules. Trying to see if I can write on here, but I don't seem like I can. There are 4 macromolecules. So put number 1 as lipids, lipids, and then put to the side lipids. One major thing in terms of cellular structure is the cell membrane. Okay, it's going to be a little more complicated than that, but I do want to mention that cell membrane. 2 are going to be your proteins, proteins, and those proteins are structural as well as enzyme. Okay, so they do 2 things. Well, probably more than 2 things, but those are 2 major things. These are going to be parts of kind of things that make up the cell. I'm not going to say parts of the cell, but these are 4, the word I want, macromolecule, or macromolecules, or biomolecules. Number 3 now is going to be carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, and those are energy storage and energy, well, we'll just go with energy storage. To some degree, lipids are also energy storage. You get fats for kind of long-term storage, but there's also carbs that have long-term storage. We probably won't go into those in great detail right now, but I do want to mention them. And I'm forgetting one. Number 4 is nucleic acids. This is what is in your nucleus. These are your DNA, your RNA, and they are hereditary molecules. Okay, that's a simple way to put it, at least for right now. But hereditary molecules, meaning that they contain the information for how things should be with that cell. So we may come back to that, but I definitely want you to know cellular makeup. That's the cellular macromolecules, because those things make a big difference when you talk about things crossing barriers, like some of those like stomach linings and the lining inside of our lungs. Some of that has to do with what kind of cell membranes those like what can cross cell membranes, what can get between cells, and understanding those cell parts will make a difference. Okay, let's look at some. This is just an overview of the organ systems. Let me check one thing real quick, guys. Trying to find my little red dot. This thing's supposed to have a red dot, but I can't. There it is. Oh, not that one. Aha. Okay, now I got a red dot. But I can't. Gotta get back to my share. I don't know if it'll let me do both at the same time. Ah, there we go. Okay, so we have different organ systems, and we're going to start kind of giving a little overview of those. So we have the integumentary system. I feel like I'm putting the emphasis in the wrong syllable. In this case, integumentary. I can't remember now where there's a slight emphasis on one of these middle syllables that I'm missing right now for some reason. Just left me. But this is the external covering. So this includes your skin, your hair, your fingernails. It waterproofs your body. Probably don't think of yourself as waterproof, but you actually are. You have a kind of waxy kind of, I don't know how to explain that in the best terms real simply, but kind of waxy coating-ish that helps to waterproof you. And this is where understanding that that's a lipid-based molecule. And lipids are, think about fats and oils. What happens when you pour oil in water? They don't mix. So you can basically use that as a waterproofing mechanism, which is good for us because we don't want our skin to dry out and lose water, which is probably the bigger aspect. It's not about keeping water out maybe as much as keeping water in. This system also cushions and protects our deeper tissue from injury. It's part of making vitamin D with the help of sunlight. We perspire, so we excrete salts. We evaporate off of our skin to cool us down. So it kind of helps us to regulate body temperature. And we have the ability to feel with this system. Okay. My dad is sometimes a jokester, and I'll ask him how he's feeling, and he'll tell me with his fingers. But she's not wrong. I mean, he does think that. He also tells me, I'll be talking, and I'll say, well, and he goes, that's where you get water. So, yeah, my dad. So your hair is part of this, your fingernails, the skin, and this system is very good at keeping out things as well. So we weren't so much worried about keeping out water, but we are worried about keeping out pathogens, right? And so this system is really important for that. And we'll go into that in more detail. This is just an overview of things we're gonna talk about through the semester. The skeletal system consists of bones, also your cartilages, ligaments, and joints. You may find this interesting. I'll go ahead and say now. Would you believe that bones are not hard at the beginning? They actually calcify later. So it's one of the reasons why they can grow. The other cool thing about bones is that they continually regenerate. So bones don't stay bones. This is why later on in life you get things like osteoporosis. It's because you're losing calcium and some of the other minerals. So you're constantly building and rebuilding and tearing down bones. This is why exercise and actually weight training is really important, because it not only builds muscle, but it strengthens bones. Because the more pressure that you put on bones, the more stronger they get. Okay? The more likely they'll keep or regenerate it with more of that calcium and minerals. So they also provide muscle attachment points for movement. This is really important because as animals, we've got to do that. We have to move. We are not plants. We cannot make our own food by sitting still in the sunlight. We have to go after our food. So muscle attachment points are really important. Of course, this is not the only way that animals can do that, but we're in the group of animals that have to have bones. They also protect our vital organs. When you think about your rib cage, that's a really big and important part of that one. They also produce blood cells, and they store minerals, and this kind of gets back to that reconstruction and tearing down of your bones. Sometimes your body will need things like calcium, and it will extract calcium from your bones. Okay, and if you don't have enough calcium going back in or the right molecules to allow you to absorb that calcium, you don't rebuild those bones. And then that's how they can weaken over time. So we will actually talk about how vitamin D plays a big portion of that because you think about vitamin D and calcium and then bones. If you don't have vitamin D, you can't absorb the calcium correctly and use it to put it in your bones, but your body needs calcium, so it extracts it from the bones, and it becomes this cycle that can be problematic, especially if you're a child that's still developing. And then you see some of this problem with older people. So you've got your skeletal system, cartilage that holds the skeletal system together. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. We're pretty much familiar with bones. Okay, the muscular system, yeah, these are just your, they're your muscles. They're what give you movement. They help you to move your bones, and they contract to pull on those bones to make them go where they need to go. So they can contract over time. It's actually a really cool mechanism when you understand it on a cellular level, just because it's just really neat. And we'll look at that. It's hard for me to describe it now without getting into the details. But you are covered in muscles. Your muscles can get stronger. They regenerate like your bones regenerate. As you move, it helps to keep you in the right postures. It can even, movement helps to produce heat. Okay? As well as eating, actually. Eating can do that as well, can help you to produce heat. Because if you think about it, we maintain our own body heat. Very important. So, when babies are born early, they have a hard time maintaining their body heat really early. That's something that humans have to be able to do. I don't think there's anything more to it than that. We'll come back to it. So this is just our overview today of some of the systems. Your nervous system. This system helps you to control everything else. It is about control from your brain, through your spinal cord, through your nerves, to your various sensory receptors, or back again. Because if you touch something and feel something, it's going to go from sensory receptors to the nerves, to the spinal cord, to the brain, to tell what's going on. So you get internal and external stimuli that you respond to, and the sensory receptors will detect different changes. Messages will be sent, although this is not our only messaging system in the body, but it is an important one. In our central nervous system, you may see this sometimes abbreviated as CNS, central nervous system. It will try to figure out what's going on. It assesses information and then activates different effectors, whether it's a muscle, a gland, whatever the case may be. So this is one of those systems that connects the whole body to the rest of the body. It's not the only one that does that, though. And it can move fairly fast. There is some limit, though, because signals going through the nervous system do have some limitations on the speed. Crazy enough, I remember watching a show as a kid. They were talking about dinosaurs, like the big brontosaurus, the big long-necked dinosaurs, and just how big they are. And I remember, I think that they have a mass of nervous system tissue at the base of their, what we would think the base of their spine before it goes to the tail. Kind of like it's not a brain, but kind of a mini processing place. Because they were so big, they had to have tissue there, they thought, because the limitations on, if the tail gets bitten, which was the example in the show, how long would it take for that signal to make it to the brain? Definitely they thought there would be a delayed reaction. So we have some limitation. This is not, the speed of light here, but it is still fast. The endocrine system is also a communication system. It helps to control, and it's not in charge of the control, but it helps to control with the guidance of the central nervous system to control the rest of the body. But instead of using the system of neurons to do that, it does it with molecules that we call hormones. And it also reaches throughout the rest of the body to connect the body. It's involved in making growth, reproduction, how to use nutrients, for example. It even will get into your blood, so your hormones may travel through the bloodstream, which is another of our systems that connect the body. And endocrine system is just really fascinating because how it interplays. Whatever the brain may need, it sometimes will affect things that are like glands. Think about when you hear endocrine system, think glands a lot of times. These glands, like your pituitary gland, which is up there in your brain, will get activated sometimes and send out signals to the rest of the body, like to your thyroid, for example. So your brain may get a signal like, hey, I'm cold, but it will activate the pituitary, which will activate the thyroid system to try to make you not cold. For example, tell the body to shiver, or tell the body to contract its capillaries at the skin so that it keeps its body heat closer to the core and not to the extremities. You know how your fingers get real cold when you go outside? It's because your body's retracting the blood. And if you step it too long, you turn blue. It's because you have less blood at your extremities. Okay, and then have you ever done that? You come in, you're really cold, you put your hand under hot water, and you're like, it's like, it burns. And it's because you're oversensitive because of all the stuff that the thyroid's telling your body to do until you get equilibrated again, and then it doesn't bother you. Okay, and we'll go into how that is really interesting. Things like hypo and hyperthyroidism, and how people who can't control their thyroid correctly have issues with like being cold or hot, depending on the problems. But it also has effects on things like your diet, like how hungry you get. So there's a lot of things that this system touches. So you have glands like the pituitary, the thyroid, the parathyroid, the adrenal glands, the thymus, the pancreas, pineal gland, and even reproduction is involved, with the ovaries and testes being glands producing various things. So testosterones and androgens, estrogen, various things like that. So you may note that most of your glands are not at the extremities of the body. They stay mostly to the central aspect, brain and then the torso. Okay, cardiovascular system. I think we're all very familiar with this one. It includes the heart, the blood vessels. The heart pumps blood. The vessels are used as transport to the rest of the body, the different tissues. Some of the main purposes are to move oxygen into the body and carbon dioxide out of the body. Nutrients. So not only do you connect to the heart, but you connect to the small intestine where you absorb lots of your nutrients. So anytime you eat something, that cardiovascular system is going to pick up those little small molecules and move them. And of course the hormones, which connects to the endocrine system. You may be noticing now that everything is connected, isn't it? Everything is connected. For me, when I teach, I like to try to show connections between things. I find if you can think about how this is connected to that, is connected to something else, and I actually have my students in my Biology 2 class for majors do a project where they have to connect things as different as food chains in the ecosystem to the circulatory system. And so there are ways of connecting those things. So as you study, if you think about how can I connect these things, how do they connect? Are they connected in more than one way? You'll remember more stuff. Okay. Okay. Now, blood is also used for transporting things that help your body against invasive attacks from foreign invaders like viruses, uh, bacteria, even pollen. Okay, allergies like that, where you absorb pollen through your nose, you breathe it in, your body thinks it's being attacked. That's why you react the way you do. Now, is pollen going to hurt you? Not really. What happens is your body hurts yourself because you think you're being attacked, and so you respond in that way. Okay. Let's see real quick. How many more systems? I'm going to do one more system, and then I'm going to stop. The lymphatic system is a great one to talk about right after the respiratory system. Not respiratory, cardiovascular system, excuse me. Because it's paired with it very closely. It doesn't do the same thing, but they connect in an interesting way, at least in my opinion. They have vessels, and that's very similar to the cardiovascular system, but they also have little lymphoid organs and lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are about identifying pathogens. So sometimes your bloodstream will pick up pathogens and the lymphatic system will then take it from the bloodstream to an organ, a lymphoid organ or a lymph node. And the whole purpose of that is to identify. So the lymph nodes will keep records, if you want to think of it as records, cells that can identify things you've already been attacked with. So it really complements the cardiovascular system with that way, but it also, the cardiovascular system doesn't have the ability to pick up water, like excess water. So think about when you swell for some reason, the lymphatic system picks up the water and then dumps it back into the cardiovascular system. So it's the lymphatic system. If the lymphatic system doesn't work, then you can't get rid of that swelling, that excess water. Have y'all ever heard of any of this thing called elephantitis? It's kind of a large leg, like the one leg or both legs get really big and huge. They're not always, as I'm saying, that elephantitis is produced this way, but sometimes it's produced when the lymphatic system doesn't work in the legs and the body's not able to reabsorb and then move that water up out of the extremities. Yeah. 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 It is. And that's one of those places where I think that the lymphatic and the cardiovascular are having a hard time working together. My mother, she doesn't have the heart problem, but she has circulatory issues with her veins and her legs. So she has water retention that puts lots of pressure on her legs. And it's definitely a big problem for her. I won't go to the details of that right now, but it cannot be pretty sometimes. But yeah, so part of that may be like with heart failure is the body's not able to pump that water that it is absorbing away to the place where it needs to go. But then it could also be that there's a lymphatic side thing where it's not actually absorbing. Because when I say water, you may wonder, like, where can water be in your body? Well, normally we think of water being inside our cells, but the lymphatic system is picking up water that's around our cells. There is actually spaces around cells, and we can't let those fill up. We have to have some water, but it has to be, kept in a balance, which we'll hit that word at the end of this PowerPoint called homeostasis. But we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I think those are all connected. white blood cells may be in the bloodstream, but they also are in the lymphatic system as well. New piece of information, which I may or may not remember to tell y'all later, but I'll tell you now. At one point, as you can see in this picture, they don't have the lymphatic system going up into the head. So at one point, not too long ago, we thought that the lymphatic system actually did not extend up into the skull region around the brain, but they have found very small lymphatic vessels in the head now. So we are still discovering things about the human body, even some small organs and muscles and things that we're teasing apart, distinctions that we've not noticed before. So I think that's a cool one that we've just, probably in the last 10 years, maybe, that we found that one. So I want to stop there. We'll come to the respiratory system next. It's got like 2 minutes left in class. Does anybody have any questions, Zoom or not Zoom? Okay. Let me just make sure Shelby and Aussie are okay.
Hey, I'm good, sir. We good.
I'm just playing with you. I didn't know how
And,
boring. Okay. I will post this since we've got a video. I'll be posting it when I get a chance onto Canvas. And thank you for that. I need to get a digital copy of it so that you have it and I have it. So that's a really good question. So the last thing I'll say is this. Your contract at the end of your syllabus, sometime this morning, I'm going to get an assignment put up. I forgot to do that. I want you to just take a picture and upload that picture to it. I'll give the instructions there. And it'll give you till sometime next week to do it. But thank you for reminding me. I totally meant to have that up today. Okay, guys, I'm going to cut the Zoom off and see y'all on Monday. If for some reason, I don't know, if we need to do this again Monday, I may run this Monday, even if everybody's here, just in case. Even if I do this, then this way I can actually record videos and then upload it again and all that stuff. So in case somebody does miss something. So we might try this, even if everybody's here. Okay. Have a great weekend, guys. And I'll see you for Monday lecture, and we'll have lab Monday afternoon, 3:30. Okay. I'll see you there.